basic topic of physiology of labor. We are always used to talking hi-fi things, but I, for one, stress that if our foundation, if our basics are very strong, then our practice, our further knowledge can be built on that very beautifully. And labor is the most central part of our practice, and the physiology of it is extremely important. Only if we understand the physiology properly will we be able to manage the pathology or the abnormality of it. So I request all the postgraduates to concentrate on this. I will go a little slowly because it is very, very important for all of you. So I'll be talking under following headings. Number one, the factors that influence the initiation of labor. And number two, the role of fetoplacental unit in this. And number three, on cervical behavior during pregnancy. So all these things are very important in continuation of pregnancy as well as initiation of labor and delivery. So first, let us look at the factors that influence the initiation of labor. This is a very, very important aspect of labor that is called phases of parturition. In one of the postgraduate question papers, I saw this. This was a question for 35 marks. Many students scored less than 10 marks in this question because most of the students confused this with the stages of labor. Now, stages of labor is different from phases of parturition. So this is beautifully given in Williams, and we have adopted the picture, the beautiful picture from Williams, with their permission, of course, in Holland and Bruce also. So this is a very important chapter which all of you must read in Williams, because if not for 35 marks, this may come for 20 marks in the other. So may I request everybody to mute the mic, please, so that it is not disturbing for the others. Thank you very much. So, okay, now phases of parturition, as all of you know, after the conception, up to 9 months, the uterus has to be quiet. So obviously, the phase 1 is called phase of quiescence. And towards the end of that 9 months, there should be activation of the labor. So it is called phase 2 or phase of activation. And then comes the actual labor part, which is called phase 3, where the uterus is stimulated. And here is the phase where you get all the stages of labor. So this is very clear here. Phases of parturition is different from stages of labor. Now, to add to the confusion of the student, there are 4 phases of parturition, as well as there are 4 stages of labor. Of course, in Williams, it has given only 3 stages of labor. We also know the stage of labor after the delivery of placenta is called stage 4, where there is permanent contraction and retraction of the uterus, and all the calamities can occur in this phase of labor or stage of labor. And the last phase is called phase of involution, where the uterus goes back to its normal size. So as you can see here, in each phase, an important event happens. In phase 1, which is the phase of quiescence, which is sort of prelude, which is a long prelude of 9 months, is actually a phase where contractile unresponsiveness is happening. That means uterus does not really respond to the agents which bring about contractions. This is called contractile unresponsiveness or phase of quiescence, where the uterus is quiet. Here, of course, there is some amount of softening of the cervix. This is what actually in the olden textbooks you will see Hagar sign. Then towards the end of 9 months, there will be preparation for labor, which is called phase of activation. And here, the most important thing that happens is cervical ripening. I'm going to elaborate on this. So let me just move on to phase 3, where there is process of labor happening. And as I told you, here is the phase where uterus starts contracting. So it's a phase of uterine contraction, which is accompanied by cervical dilatation and finally delivery of the baby and placenta. So phase 4 is a phase where there is involution of the uterus. Uterus goes back to its normal size and shape, and it is the phase of sort of involution or recovery. Now let us look at what are the factors that regulate different phases of parturition, not stages, phases. So now onwards, you should know the difference between phases of parturition and stages of labor. Well, now let's go to the factors. There are a whole lot of factors. The phase 1, which is a phase of quiescence, the leading hormones are progesterone, prostacyclin, relaxin, nitric oxide, and HCG, CRH also. Whereas in the phase of cervical ripening, phase 2, estrogen and the hyaluronin, they lead the role. Whereas in phase 3, whole lot of oxytocics, starting from prostaglandin, oxytocin itself, and then inflammatory cell activation also may have a role. And in phase 4, there is oxytocin and inflammatory cell activation. So among these hormones, if I have to underline important hormones, in phase 1, it is mostly progesterone. All of us know that progesterone means pregnancy, pregnancy means progesterone. Of course, again, easy to remember, relaxin, because uterus has to be relaxed. Whereas come phase 2, it is estrogen dominance over progesterone, and then progesterone is also there, but it is in the lower quantity. So hyaluronin also increases. That's where the cervical ripening happens. In phase 3, of course, the prostaglandins and oxytocin, these are the leaders. And in phase 4, it is inflammatory cell activation. So if you can't remember so many things, at least remember quiescence means progesterone and relaxin, activation means estrogen and hyaluronin, contraction or stimulation means prostaglandin and oxytocin, and phase 4 means inflammatory cell activation. Okay, now having understood the 4 phases of parturition and the factors that influence them, let us look at now who is initiating the labor, or why should the labor set in, which was all this while quiet uterus. The exact cause and the mechanism for the onset of labor are not known. This is the standard statement for most of the topics, because the science is one which keeps on evolving. But whenever we don't know the exact cause, there will be theories, and the main theories are the functional loss of pregnancy maintenance factors. I mean, this is very easy to guess. See, as you come to post-graduation, you should be able to do the intelligent guessing. So you should know the one which has disrupted the quiescence, that means functional loss of pregnancy maintenance factors, and finally, synthesis of factors that induce parturition. This is also not a very difficult one to guess. So these are the 2 important theories that will cause the onset of labor. Now let's go little specifics into it. What is actually the triggering factor for onset of labor? As you know, labor has got 2 things. One is timing and other one is the actual process. Now, as far as the timing is concerned, it's the chief guest always who decides the starting time of the function. Similarly, who is the chief guest here? It's the fetus. So fetus will decide when to come out. Of course, nowadays, the astrologers decide, and sometimes the parents decide, sometimes the mother-in-law decides, sometimes the doctors decide. But if you leave the labor alone, it is the fetus who decides when to come out. I will explain that little further. The second one is, okay, fetus has decided, but there should be somebody to spread the red carpet. Who is doing that initiation of labor? It is the placenta and the fetal membranes who are going to initiate on the instruction from the fetus. Okay, now is the time the fetus has to come out. Let us start working. Now, there is a lot of evidence to support that hormones are the ones which will do this orchestra. So hormonal basis has been proven beyond doubt, and I am going to elaborate each one of them. So first hormones are LH and HCG. All of you know HCG is the hormone of pregnancy. That's how detect pregnancy. So the receptors for these hormones are greater during pregnancy than in labor. So as the labor approaches, these hormones will go down, and that's how the labor sets in. Relaxin, as you all now understand, that it helps in inhibition of myometrial contractions. Name also is very easy to remember. CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, their levels increase sharply during last 6 to 8 weeks of pregnancy, and they are the ones who have a role in timing of human parturition. So CRH is a very important hormone. So I have grouped the hormones in such a way, which are like, corticotropin releasing hormone, HCG. These are the types of hormones which are like peptides or the protein type of hormones. Then we have steroid hormones, which is progesterone. It reduces the muscle excitability, and there's a dramatic decline of maternal plasma progesterone concentration prior to the onset of labor. That's exactly why progesterone is always given whenever there is preterm contractions. Estrogen, on the other hand, it induces myometrial excitability. So there has to be an alteration of estrogen to progesterone ratio during the initiation of labor or towards the end of the pregnancy. See, we need only two hormones, estrogen and progesterone. That's what everybody makes fun of us. You have hardly two hormones and two gonadotropins, and you still talk too much. Yes, we have only two hormones, but these two hormones have to be in the right proportion at the right time. Only then everything will be right. So throughout pregnancy, there should be dominance of progesterone, but towards the end, there should be dominance of estrogen. Estrogens also stimulate prostaglandin synthesis. This also we have understood in another topic called endometriosis. So there is a vicious circle. Estrogen promotes prostaglandin, prostaglandin promotes cyclooxygenase, and cyclooxygenase promotes estrogen. So this is a vicious circle going on there. Here also, estrogen will stimulate production of prostaglandin, and it sensitizes the myometrium so that it responds very nicely to the oxytocin or any other stimulus. Even the massaging of the uterus also helps in contraction of the uterus as we do it after the delivery of placenta. Why it happens? Because this myometrium is sensitized by estrogens. So hormones of onset of labor. Now I come to the actual hormones, that is oxytocin and prostaglandin. Oxytocin promotes myometrial contraction. There is no doubt in this at all for an obstetrician. But what is most important is the next line. It is not primarily responsible for the onset of labor. We had not understood this for a long, long time. During my undergraduation, during my post-graduation, and during my junior faculty time, we were using oxytocin to induce labor. Now we know it is not a very good drug for induction of labor. Yes, it brings about myometrial contraction. Yes, it augments the labor. But as far as the onset of labor is concerned, this is not the hormone primarily responsible. That's why I remember we used to give oxytocin drip for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days sometimes, and she was never getting into contractions or she was never getting into labor. So this is the most important thing everybody should understand. I have put it in the reading also. The fetal production has been demonstrated, but pathways by which it reaches myometrium is not established well. Prostaglandins, on the other hand, are intimately connected to the onset of labor. So that's why now everywhere throughout the world, we use prostaglandin to induce labor. Okay, so for augmentation, we may use oxytocin, but as far as the induction is concerned, we prefer prostaglandins. It can initiate uterine contractions at any stage of pregnancy. So you know that prostaglandins we are using in first trimester, prostaglandin we are using it in second trimester as well as in third trimester. Of course, the dosage varies. So having understood the factors of initiation of labor, let's now go to the role of fetoplacental unit in the initiation of all these things. So fetoplacental contribution is very important contribution in the initiation of labor because this is the one which breaks the equilibrium. When the fetus is stressed due to various reasons, the concentrations of CRH, corticotropin release. If you remember my previous slide where I said towards the end of pregnancy, that is 6 to 8 weeks, CRH increases. So probably it is increasing because of the secretion from the fetus, and a fetus, if it gets stressed earlier than 40 weeks, it can release corticotropin releasing hormones. That's probably why in preeclampsia, in heart disease, in anemia, in any other situation where there's placental insufficiency, it is the fetus which gets stressed and it will release CRH hormone, and that will come into amniotic fluid and maternal plasma, and that's how all levels are increased. It is believed to be mainly from the placenta. Of course, feto-placenta is one unit if you consider that way. And placental CRH plays an important role in the timing and regulation of the parturition. So I hope it all makes sense now to us. Why should there be preterm labor whenever there is a complication or a comorbidity in a pregnancy? It's all due to the stress that the baby faces in all those complications. I'll repeat myself: preeclampsia, heart disease, anemia, or even anything that causes the stress for the fetus inside. Fetus is the one which will secrete CRH, and CRH will actually bring about the contraction. I'm going to explain that further. Don't worry about those annotations, blue line, red line, and all that. Doesn't matter. Don't worry.
No problem.
So in phase 2 or 3 of parturition, that is cervical ripening and uterine contractions, there will be modification in the CRH receptors that favors switch from cyclic AMP formation to increased myometrial cell calcium levels via protein kinase C activation. I'm going to show that beautiful picture, which all the postgraduates should blow up and put a frame on that and put it in their rooms. I'm going to show that in the next probably 2 slides. CRH augments the contraction-inducing potency of a given dose for oxytocin in human myometrial strips. So as you can see here, oxytocin alone cannot act unless CRH has augmented the contraction-inducing potency of a particular myometrial cell. So CRH also stimulates fetal adrenals to produce C19 steroid synthesis, thereby increasing substrate for placental aromatization. So can you please switch off your mics? It is disturbing. Okay. So CRH stimulates the production of C19 steroids, that is progesterones, in a way androgens, which are converted to estrogens. And all of us have already understood it is the dominance of estrogen towards the end that causes the whole initiation of labor. So who induces that? It is CRH. CRH stimulates fetal adrenals to produce C19 steroid synthesis, thereby increasing substrate for placental aromatization, which will give us estrogen. An increased production of estrogens would shift the estrogen-progesterone ratio in favor of estrogen and promote the expression of a series of myometrial contractile proteins. So that's how everything makes sense now. Let me repeat one more time. CRH is the one is secreted by the fetus under stress, and that CRH will bring about the augmentation of the myometrials to respond to oxytocin. On the other hand, it will produce the 19 steroids, and which will be converted into estrogen, and the ratio is altered. Estrogen in turn will stimulate or will increase the production of prostaglandin, and the whole thing is kick-started. So we will see this maternal orchestra in a different way. The fetus produces cortisol and DHEAS. DHEAS is a substrate for estrogen. And placenta, there will be an increase in CRH, oxytocin, and prostaglandin. And in the mother, there will be increase in the gap junction uterine receptor for prostaglandins and oxytocin, and there will be increase in contraction associated proteins. So this is the picture I was talking about, which should be framed and put up in your rooms. A very, very beautiful picture and very important picture. It is in Williams. We took permission and reproduced this picture in Holland and Bruce. So I'll go slowly. As you can see here, the uterine relaxation is maintained by the factors that increase the myocyte cyclic adenosine monophosphate. As you can see here, this cyclic AMP is increased, and that will activate protein kinase A, PKA, to promote the phosphodiesterase activity with dephosphorylation of myosin light chain kinase. See this myosin light chain kinase. So that's where there will be relaxation of the uterine myometrium. There are also processes that serve to maintain action in a globular form and thus to prevent fibril formation necessary for the contraction. On the other hand, as you can see here, the uterus, the myometrium is contracted, and this is facilitated by uterine contraction results from reversal of previous sequences. What I said, cyclic AMP is decreased, PKA is decreased, and everything is reversed. So actin now assumes a fibrillar form, and calcium enters the cells to combine with calmodulin to form complexes. So calcium is entering now, as you can see here, and that will bring about the contractions. So these complexes activate MLCK to bring about phosphorylation of the myosin light chains, and that's how this is the complex, and that's how there will be contraction of the myometrium. This generates ATPase activity to cause sliding of myosin over actin fibrils, which is a uterine contractor. So just to summarize this whole thing, fetal cortisol reduces placental progesterone production, number one. It also, the decrease in the suppression of myometrial activity by progesterone is removed, right? So the myometrium was kept under relaxation by progesterone, that is been removed. Now there is an increase in estrogen to progesterone ratio and hence formation of prostaglandin. Then that enhanced formation of gap junction also will occur at the same time. Then what happens? Production of prostaglandin in decidia and fetal membranes, and increase in output of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary, which increases the synthesis or release of prostaglandin in turn. And finally, oxytocin inhibits the binding of calcium, thus increasing its amount in the myometrium. All of us know when the calcium enters, myometrium contracts. So I come to the last part of my talk in next 5 minutes is the cervical behavior in pregnancy. It requires a separate, partition. That's why I put it under separate heading. All of you know phase 1, where uterine quiescence happening, cervix also has to be quiet, and there is cervical softening. And this is due to increased vascularity, stromal hypertrophy, glandular hypertrophy and hyperplasia, and compositional or structural changes of the extracellular matrix. Cervix is soft, but it is competent. Cervix also plays the role of a barrier. Because of its thick mucus, it becomes rich in immunoglobulins and cytokines. Also, it is regulated by tight junction proteins such as claudins 1 and 2. Cervical length is an important issue throughout pregnancy, as all of us know. It is an independent variable in the prediction of preterm labor. It is inversely related to the occurrence of preterm labor, and the progressive shortening is more predictive than an absolute length of the cervix. Now, how do we know what is progressive shortening? For that, we need to know how the cervix becomes short. Cervix shortens by 0.03 centimeters per week in general population. It decreases, a decrease of more than 0.41 centimeters per week indicates cervix is going to have insufficiency. That's why a serial cervical length estimation is more important than a single length. But if you want to go for a single length, then anything that is shorter than 25 millimeters is the optimal cutoff. Cervical length measuring is done by PV, but it is not very reliable. TAS also overestimates because of the bladder. Best estimation is by TVS. So this is the way we have to measure. These are the points. All of you know that, so I'm not going to elaborate that. Then comes the phase 2 of cervical ripening. Here it begins weeks before the onset of contractions. Remember this. And there is extensive remodeling of cervix happens to facilitate cervical yielding and dilatation upon contraction. It is controlled by the same hormones regulating the uterine contractions, that is oxytocin, prostaglandins. So there is epithelia cells in the cervix. It helps in regulating tissue hydration through expression of aquaporins, that is water channel proteins. So what happens is there will be less uniformity of the collagen fibrils. there is disorganization. See, this is a very thick and densely placed collagens, so cervix will be patent. Whereas when there is ununiformity and disorganization, they are widely spaced and they are shortened and sometimes degraded also, cervical ripening happens. So glycosaminoglycans are the large molecular weight hyaluronins. They create and fill the space to increase the elasticity and matrix deorganization, whereas low molecular weight hyaluronins have pro-inflammatory proteins. So proteoglycans, the total amount and composition within the matrix are altered. Decorin and biglycan, they interact with collagen and influence the packing and order of the collagen fibrils. So finally, it is the inflammatory changes probably that will bring about cervical ripening. So in labor, what happens? There is effacement, that is expulsion of the mucus plug and formation of the forebags, and there is dilatation, which has got latent and active phase. Probably this is the picture all of us know. I'm not going to elaborate that. That's what happens in the phase 3. The next talk is on 6 is the new 4. They will elaborate it further. And finally, in puerperium, cervical repair happens, which involves resolution of inflammation, promotion of tissue repair, and recreation of the dense connective tissue and restoration of structural integrity. So thank you very much for your patient listening. I hope I have completed in time.
Thank you, Dr. Muralidhar. It was perfect. Today we learned, obviously we know now the knowledge of physiology of labor is important to understand, and we have to know the difference, because we have to know when we have to allow nature to do her job and when we have to intervene and mimic nature. So just to sum up, he talked about the difference between stages and phases. This is for the postgraduates. The factors from quiescent to the active phase, and the hormones that come into play, and the key, the work done by ligands about the steroid corticotropin releasing hormone. It's from the feto-placental maternal unit, how it works. And then the most important of all, it's at the cervix that starts the whole labor. So excellent talk. And there haven't been any questions except then wanting your slides and your this thing about excellent and clapping and thumbs up that I can see in the chat box. And your you have exhausted your time too, so maybe we could think. But if there are questions, we will mail it to you.
Yeah. So, Prema,
so thank you once again, and over to Anil. Anil,
okay.
You want to do the thanking?
Okay. So, Prema, you have summarized it very beautifully. Put it in just some 6-7 lines, and I will definitely share this PDF format of this my talk. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Anil.
Anil,